I'd like to call this meeting of the Special Ed, Alternative Ed, and Early Childhood Subcommittee to order. Please call the roll.
Ms. Draggia.
Here.
Ms. Larrabee. Here. Ms. Roberts.
Here.
Please rise for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pursuant to the open meeting law, any person may make an audio or video recording of this public meeting or may transmit the meeting to any meeting. Attendees are therefore advised that such recordings or transmissions are being made, whether perceived or unperceived, by those present and are deemed acknowledged and permissible. Is there anybody for citizen input? Okay, we're going to jump right to the agenda, and the first item is a discussion and a vote to refer special education job description. I'll turn it over to the superintendent. You can either open it or pass it on, or...
Yep, this is your job description, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, Assistant Superintendent Obiching will talk through this job description.
So, like I had mentioned previously, one of my concerns about being able to truly support the work that's happening in the building is the heavy lift that compliance takes on my special education leadership team currently, meaning my supervisors, who are certainly here tonight. What I did was I created a job description that will allow another administrator, preferably an SNON, to be able to take that lift of the compliance piece, which is, equally as important as to the instruction and to the services that we provide students, and really be able to focus on that. We have plenty of data that shows our compliance is not great, our files are not great, and in order to do the work in that area, I feel like we need someone that is specializing or focusing, not really specializing, focusing specifically in that area to support me in making the changes that need to happen so we can be in more compliance with DESE regulations, as well as allow the supervisors to do the work that's needed in the buildings with administrators, staff, and then ultimately impact the students. So that's the job description that you see here. Those pieces really are things outside of the building. And again, do things overlap? Sure, they would with my position, with the supervisor's position, because at any given time, it's all hands on deck when something needs to be done. Or somebody's out for any reason and someone else needs to step in. So there'll certainly be times. We have a great team of people. I want this team of people to continue to be doing the good work that they're doing. We've talked about caseloads, and we're able to reduce those by adding more supervisors. But this compliance piece was one area when I was asked to kind of think about a different, an additional role, sorry about that, an additional role in how they could better support the team. This is what I'm recommending. I'm happy to answer.
I have one for now.
Sure.
Who leads the CPAC now? Is it you?
So I
Who
go to
attends
all the
meetings?
meetings right now, yep. And again, with, we have a great president. Our membership is really, we're trying to get more parents to be engaged. And, Megan is a great president. She's hoping to get some more officers, but right now it's on myself and our office to really help her do that and help her put out the information and plan the monthly meetings.
Okay, but you'll still be involved as well as this person.
Absolutely. But there
who
are
comes
times where if I couldn't go, I would like
Okay.
somebody else to be there.
Right, which is crucial.
Or this coming, so for example, we have a meeting tomorrow night in CPAC. One of the topics the families want to talk about, which I think is important right now, is ESY. So I'm bringing my team of supervisors because they're the ones that are helping me right now with ESY, where this position would be able to speak to that and they wouldn't always need to come, right? So those types of things. So the burden wouldn't always be on me and this leadership team.
I yield for now. Okay.
So on that, this is a little bit off topic, but just on the CPAC piece, I think part of the rationale for having a position like this too is about restoring trust in the district. So a lot of people are not going to CPAC meetings because there is not a whole lot of trust in the special ed department right now, and for good reason. Like, let's be honest about that. When you're bringing a whole team of supervisors, right, as a parent, that's intimidating. And it feels very much like it's a district meeting versus it's a family meeting. So I think having that one person that could represent would be really helpful. Not that, anyone at this table or behind the table are intimidating people, but when you're sitting there as a parent and you're trying to understand what's happening, it's really overwhelming.
Right. And the reason to bring, a group of people with me is some specialize in elementary school,
Right.
some are at the high school, so you never know what type of
But if
questions
you have that
right.
one person.
So if you had that one person, not that that person wouldn't be working with this leadership team, but they would have all the information to be able to bring forth.
I yield for now.
So I had a question on, obviously, I support the need for a second administrator, but I'm trying to look at it in the context of the organizational chart for your department.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't recall getting the new one, but from what I can see is it seems like it's yourself and then the supervisors across. My personal belief is that we need an org chart where you have an assistant that would be above the supervisors to be your second person. I called it an assistant superintendent because it just
Right.
kind of
Right.
makes sense to call it the assistant to the assistant superintendent, but I'm not so worried about what the name of it is, whereas where this is gonna fit in now, in the
Right.
org chart.
I do see it because I'd like it to be a 12-month position because a lot of our planning and, it happens in the summer. So I already see that as like above the supervisors, but I'm gonna still be supervising, evaluating supervisors. This person's, it's like a branch off, right? So if it's me, then a new position, the supervisors. Off of that person are these people, the team chairs, the clerks, the related service providers, all those people that span the district and now are being supervised by all different people depending on where they provide the service, right? So now we can consolidate that piece of it all. And although I say my leadership team, because honestly, Mr. Aguirre, these guys are, the boots on the ground. They keep our department moving forward. They work really hard. So yes, this person would sit above them, but not to evaluate them because I want that relationship to still be very, very, very collaborative. They have to work in tandem, compliance and services. And when you put one above the other as far as evaluative goes, then you kind of lose that piece. So in the sense of, the work days and the extent of like what this person is doing with all this compliance solely falling on them and not having this team, like another team with them, right? They would be, in my eyes, above the supervisor in an organizational chart.
They would be your assistant.
But wouldn't oversee.
Basically, yeah.
I just want them to maintain that collaborative relationship, and I want to oversee that person and the supervisors to make sure that the vision of the program, the needs of we're going forward, right?
I just think the org chart is where I think we need to focus because things change, things come, go, whatever, things happen, you get pulled in different directions and the like. So the way I was envisioning this is you having an assistant, just like Mrs. Ponce has you as an assistant and Dr. Brown and Dr. Curley. So I wasn't envisioning in this department the same type of thing. Now, who you choose as the director through the superintendent to say these people are going to get evaluated by so-and-so or so-and-so. In an org chart, it still should be, the position should be your assistant, meaning if you were absent from the district. Right now we have 6, 7, I don't know how many supervisors you have. But if you look at an org chart, you'd say, this would be the person. If we look at a school, we have a principal and the vice principals or associate principals. So we would know principal's not here, this is the next layer of, I think we need to be careful about how we word this to try to not necessarily, I'm not sure the rationale for why it's called what it is or the salary and this and that, but I think we need to get it right so that when it's done, this is what we have. We have a person in charge, we have a person under them in charge on the org chart, then we have the layers. You guys pick who is. I don't think the evaluation piece of like the formal evaluation needs to be in the job description because that would pigeonhole us to that. Whereas it says supervise is different. So you can supervise somebody on an org chart but not be their evaluator. So I think we just gotta be careful as we're writing it to not lock ourselves into something that might not be functional a year from now or whatever, because once we do this, it's gonna be sort of set. 12-month piece, I I agree. I think we need to look at the time, the time that it's needed to do this job effectively, just like for yourself or the superintendent. But we can't do that without also understanding what the contracts look like. What do the other people get paid that are in the department? What do people get paid in the schools? So going to the bottom of this where I see salary, 12-month position, 100 to 130, that's way off, in my opinion. Because who are we gonna start at $100,000, if we're being honest, at this level of a position that we all, I think, agree that in the org chart would be the second person under, and we have everybody else making more than them at 100,000. This 100,000 shouldn't even be listed in my mind, because it's just totally out of whack. Vice principals in the elementary school get paid 115,000, and we're gonna hire the second in charge of the special education department, but potentially 100.
But we could, if we could bring the range to the school committee, just like we do for other S-Nons, right? So if this gets referred and we can, if it's an S-Non, as an S-Non position, then we can adjust and bring that range to the.
Oh, we could always change it. I'm just saying
Right.
now, in this, like,
Right.
the purpose of this type of meeting is so that we can hash through some of the questions before it gets to the full committee.
I did ask Mr. Coogan for feedback on this particular range, because I was going realistically when I think about a special education director in a different district, like a starting range might be around here. But I'm not the expert in ranges, and so I didn't hear anything, so I thought it was okay to put that range. But again, I'm open to suggestions with that.
What I think, I guess I can say it like this, trying to be nice, that when we put something like this at 100,000 to 130, it gives the impression to people that that's what we actually think somebody would take the job for. Like a new person just coming into this type of role would get 100,000. So like if you compare it to a counselor or a teacher or whatever, the range is 60 to 90. Well, your first year you get this, this is actually hinting that we would get somebody for this position, be able to put them in, and they'd be making 20,000 less than everybody else. That's the part that it, to me, is not. But we can change it. We can tweak it. We can have like motions to come back and.
We have to change it, because if the supervisors are below this position, then the supervisors are already making more than 100. So we have to change.
We want to attract people that want to come into this district, that have the qualifications. Then we need to be able to pay accordingly.
And I think it's just, we can't be afraid to actually have a conversation about reality of what salaries are. And I think sometimes around this table and other places, people are worried about trying to say, well, talk about salaries or this and that. But the reality is, this is true. I could pull out my binder and show you what the union contracts are, how many days they work, how many this. And we could justify that, and this shouldn't even be here. So I don't want to not put this forward for that, but I think you guys maybe have to come back and do a little research on it.
Well, if the job description gets approved or referred to the full committee, we can make the adjustment and share it in the Friday, saying that we're gonna, with the new range, or when we bring it forth on the 12th, we can have the new range on there. If that's the will of this subcommittee.
Yeah, I think we should have some, Ms. Lowry, do you have another question?
No, not right now.
So, just to continue that line of thinking, so the rationale should be related to what everybody else is getting. I think you got that
We'll look at
message. And I think at the same time, it's good to look at that too, because we gotta realize what people are making in certain positions and whether they report to other folks, or it just shouldn't be, it shouldn't go backwards. The 12-month piece, I think, is something that's needed, but we also, I think realistically, when there's certain positions that require that type of investment of time, we have to also look at all of our other positions that we currently have, that we actually sometimes get, like I said, pigeonholed into a certain thing. There's a lot of positions that shouldn't be 195, 181. They're that way because of history and just the way that it's been here. Oh, you're in the union, you get this, you're in, like these are the days. But the positions, when they get to upper levels, $130,000, $140,000 positions, you no longer should be in those, I can only work so many days, because she works more than that, even though the contract says she could take more vacation, you the same, like, so I just think that's a bigger issue to be aware of before we start adding. As we add, let's just be honest and say, this is what it is. We had assistant superintendents, as you know, we advertised at 120 to 135. The person was making more than that before they advertised. Like, it doesn't make sense. But was this pared down at all? Like what?
Pared down from,
I guess pared down from if the org chart was that they're under you, if that's what you go back and look at this and you
Yeah.
see that the org chart says that this person's under you, I think under the responsibilities, we need to put something in here that they're the second in
in my
command of.
absence.
Yeah, something along those lines, because I looked through this briefly, and it doesn't appear as clear in my mind, so I'd like to.
I think that number 14, we could actually adjust that. It says, assume any additional responsibilities and duties as deemed by appropriate by the assistant superintendent of special ed, and we could add also in her absence or whatever. We'll work around with that.
And my last comment is in the title. I think and I could be totally off on this, but I think a title of assistant special ed director, or assistant, whatever you call it, the special ed and student service, whatever the name would be, I just think that's a more popular way to get somebody in.
Right, we just don't, we do have some positions with those
That's
that are already
okay.
direct, so.
But we can call, my opinion would be, we can call this whatever we need to in order to attract the best person. And in my mind, calling it at the right salary, as well as an assistant to the special ed director, is a way that something that we should consider.
Or associate to the.
Something,
which was the-
whatever you wanna, I think if I
the
looked at this and
highest
said,
number of
if I'm out there in the stratosphere saying, maybe someday I wanna be a sped director, maybe someday I wanna be a superintendent, whatever,
Yeah,
and I look at it and says, oh, I can be a senior advisor of special ed compliance and programming, or I can be the assistant special ed director, I'd probably go with the
I
second.
totally understand your thinking. The other piece is there are some positions that have already existed with different descriptions, and if they've already existed, I just don't know, again, this is like not my world, right? I live in special education, but creating a title for a position that is new, using an existing title, I'm not sure where that goes, like how that, so again, just need some more guidance on what does that look like if it already exists.
I think certainly you could get there. My personal feeling is, just because something was called something, we've never had a position that has these responsibilities with this type of information. So whether something was called it or not, to me, that's not an issue. Secondly, what we do here in this district, which I don't understand, is that when we get rid of positions, we don't take them out. So if I had a position called XYZ, and we no longer have XYZ by the contract, that's gone. We just keep these things lingering in the background, and it makes it confusing, so.
Right. I
But-
think that's why,
Contractually speaking, we can't just do away with a position, whether that's FREA or FRAA. We can't eliminate that position and then 2 years down the road, resurrect that position under a different guise and say, okay, now it's a different position, because,
If you had
That's just-
totally different responsibilities, you could.
well, we would have to rework that so that, because we want to make sure that we're also true to, and
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
you say, truth in advertising. We don't want to say we're going to eliminate it, get rid of it from the union, and then bring it back with a different name. So we were just trying to be cognizant of that and making sure that the position is something that is not something that already existed, and that it's something that's going to serve the department well.
and this is
all.
a title that's
why.
used in
So we'll-
Boston Public Schools.
That's where she went to a thing at Urban's, and she looked around. So certainly we can look around to see. I just want to make sure that it's a position that's unique and serves the needs of Ms. Obenching as her assistant, as you say, or second in charge.
Ms. Lowry.
Yeah, so when you first came to us, right, one of your number one focus area was compliance, right? So, and I remember that right off the bat. And when I first saw this and read this weekend, I saw that, and it made me happy. So what I'm trying to say is, as long as we put the duties in the job description and your focus is gonna be what you wanna focus on, I don't find anything wrong with that. If we can just put at the bottom that this person is going to be in charge in your absence, I like seeing compliance there because it's your mission. That was your focus and that's what your belief is moving forward is something we should be focusing on. So, I mean, I'll yield with that.
I don't think we'll take compliance out. I think it's what comes before the word compliance.
Right.
Yeah, the senior.
Okay,
Just
so we'll
making
leave it
sure
compliance
that
in.
it's, yeah.
I would like to leave compliance in.
Well, I think
Ms.
that's, I
Rodgers.
think that's accurate, that that person is responsible for compliance and programming and,
Okay.
but the senior advisor piece, I guess, is the piece that we're kind of wondering about, right? How does that fit in? But to be fair, again, if they're completely different job duties, then why couldn't you call it something different? Right, a senior advisor to compliance or senior advisor, special education compliance and programming, right? How is that different from an assistant to the assistant or an associate, whatever that
The
looks like?
director.
Are
Right.
we gonna attract the right people with senior advisor?
I think that's what the question
Right.
is. Are we gonna attract the right clientele?
And there's no title protection anywhere. So it's not, so if we have a different title in there that would attract the right people with completely different job descriptions, I'm assuming that we're in an okay shape.
And those are the questions I just
Yeah.
don't have the
Right.
answer to.
Right.
Like I don't.
I think it's fair to say you guys know where I think we're all coming from. We want
Yeah.
to support you
Yep.
and support this type of position. I just don't want you to be afraid for reasons that that existed before. I want you to do what you think is the best thing to get the right person at the right salary and what they need to do. And don't pigeonhole yourself to what the responsibilities are. There has to be at the end of every job description additional duties as opposed to, that has to be in every job description going forward, period, end of story, in my opinion. I will not vote as one member for that ever again to come in like we have in another couple cases. But you also have, what if you get a person in and this was tailored to this particular piece and you got this great candidate that was great at something else? You gotta give yourself some flexibility too, that they could do other things. That's why I think the assistant to you is actually the best piece, because you can use them to their skill set, the best that they might offer you, and it might not even be something that you know about right now.
And it wasn't so much a question, it was just reiterating that I don't think we have to get stuck on what other people's titles were in the past.
Nice, is that already?
No.
So we're looking for a motion to refer with those two changes.
Motion to refer.
Motion to refer, seconded, and the changes would just be what we discussed, that you guys are gonna come back with a couple of revisions.
We'll send it in the Friday. We'll send it in the Friday update. Does that work?
So, yeah. Roll call.
Ms. Draggia?
Yes.
Mr. Ms. Larrabee?
Yes.
Ms. Roderick?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank
May
you.
I just, while we're talking about job descriptions, can we also get an update on other job descriptions that are in limbo, under special education?
The
Not here, I'm saying in the Friday email.
sure.
To say what we have, and I'd also like to request any information that has gone back and forth related to any other special ed job descriptions get sent at the same time. And we'll go to 3.02, discussion and vote specialized programming curriculum. Madam Superintendent, or your designee.
Ms. Kennedy's actually going to talk about this, so take it away, Stephanie.
So I had met with Ms. Obenchain about the students that are currently sitting in our middle school grades that are struggling to accurately read grade level text, and to come up with an action plan for supporting those students and in turn supporting the teachers that service those students. When we think about the students that historically are going into our middle schools, there's about 15% of them that are struggling to accurately read grade level text when they live 5th grade. This is a small subset, and technically if you think about like an MTSS triangle, it kind of matches what it should be. I don't know if I should say should be, but what's expected. And so we looked into the program called Language Circle Project Read Linguistics, which is created for grades 3 and all the way into adulthood. It's an accelerated phonics and word study program that's aligned to the phonics program that we provided professional development and materials in this year for our elementary school kids. Fully aligned to the science of reading. So what happens is students take a diagnostic assessment. Once we identify that a student has an issue with accuracy, which will directly and negatively impact their reading fluency, which will directly and negatively impact their comprehension. So once we identify that that is the issue, we administer a diagnostic assessment, and that diagnostic assessment tells us where in the program a child would place to begin instruction. It's a multi-sensory curriculum. It's got tons of research behind it. It's created by Dr. Tori Green, who has been in the field for a very, very long time. It's focused on the 5 components of early instruction. It has a spelling component, it has a comp component, it has oral language work in it. And it follows Madeline Hunter's design, which is you start with a review of what you learned yesterday. You're taught a brand new skill directly and explicitly. Then you're given an I do, we do, you do opportunity for practice to independence in that skill. And then the next day you start with a review of the previous skill and all over again. It's heavily scaffolded for students. It would be done by special educators or interventionists, and potentially paras in some cases, that would be trained by the company in a 6-hour virtual training. And they would be prepared to begin the work with students right after the initial training. So where our ask is for the materials and for the training of those materials. I think it was 70. Let me pull it up for you.
She's just gonna pull up the amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
And then
I
Stephanie,
think you're
this
right, it's
supports
70.
we use Project Read in the younger grades,
We do.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So our substantially separate students will receive Project Read, but they're identified as, struggling with reading in the early grades if they still have not mastered reading by the time they get to middle school. Then this kind of takes over, right, and continues the work.
So does anybody have any questions while she's looking for Ms. Roberts?
So did you say it was only for yourself separate? Did I misunderstand that? No, okay. Sorry, that last comment just kind of
It
threw me
will
off
be,
for a
yes,
second. Okay.
so, yes, if there's students in the inclusion as well,
Okay.
that still struggle when they get to 5th grade, we would
So-
transition to this type of program.
Okay. Is this sort of a continuation when you mentioned the phonics program in the elementary schools is similar to what the kids are doing with ECRI and the IDB?
No.
Okay. Because that language sounded similar.
Right. So it is similar in that it's aligned to the science of reading. So ECRI is for the most part the grade level content that the class is working on at that time, where this would be where the child is developmentally and bringing them up from there. So children would actually receive both of those things if they were a child who needed to have the intervention.
Okay. I yield.
Sorry, because I'm looking for it right now.
What is the, I think the superintendent said it was like 70,000?
I think so.
So roughly
Yeah.
70,000 for this stuff. And that's an annual occurrence, or is this just is this
No.
online, or you just gotta keep on buying them?
No, you don't have to keep buying it. So once someone is trained with the materials are then in the building and they'd stay there. The only recurring cost would be if a teacher were to leave and we needed to train a new teacher to take on those materials.
Very similar to Advantage.
Yeah.
We do.
And when you said, it says here tailored for grades 3 to adult, and then the middle school, like, are we not gonna do it with grade 3? Because there's other things in place, or is it
No, we do, we could start it in grade 3. Project Read is typically what we use in grade 3, but in grades 4 and 5, it's appropriate to use linguistics. The purchase that we made would cover grades 4 through middle school. As it would cover all of those teachers and all of the materials that are needed.
Ms. Lowry?
It would be either or though, right? At that-
Yes,
okay.
yeah.
It wouldn't
So
be-
the difference between the two programs is that Project Read is at a slower pace. There's many more exposures to the same content as you go through it. Where when you get into grade 4 is where we usually make the shift. When you get into grade 4, it's accelerated. I'll give you an example. In Project Read, you learn the syllable types in a sequence that makes sense for younger students. So you'd start with closed syllables and you'd move into Magic E, blah, blah, blah. When you are learning it in linguistics, it's accelerated in that you learn closed syllables, but then the words that you're reading are multisyllabic, so it might be picnic instead of cat. It moves it much quicker. Sometimes we find that with our students in grade 4 and beyond, it's too fast, and we have to pull back and drop back into Project Read. We want to do what's best for the kid.
Okay, thank you.
So when you wrote here 19% of 4th graders, 15% of 5th graders are struggling, that's with all of the things that we already have.
Project Read training happened in February. Project Read has been in the district for a while, but it kind of fell off the radar. No one was supporting it. We started the training again this year. And teachers began using the materials with students. So this is basically what it looks like. So at the end of this school year, that's what our kids are leaving. That's how our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders are leaving 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade.
So theoretically it was worse. If we were doing some other interventions now, theoretically a couple of years ago it was worse than this?
This is pretty true to what it usually is. And so what I would say is that for an intervention to really take hold, it has to be done with fidelity for up to 20 sessions. I can't for sure tell you that anyone had done it with fidelity for 20 sessions because the teacher was learning the program at the same time as the kids learning the program. So when you think about effective intervention, that teacher knows it inside and out. And so now they've been using it for the past couple of months. When they start in September, they should feel far more comfortable with those materials and their kids will benefit more from it.
But we still have several special education teachers that aren't trained.
True. Mm-hmm.
So they have not gone through that training yet, so that's the other thing that we need to do.
Yeah, I'm looking at what you wrote, because one of the questions I was going to have was who's going to actually do this work?
Mm-hmm.
And you were a special educated interventionist of Paris.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that you have enough of those in the 5th grade, and the schedules are such that you can actually do that across every 5th grade in the district.
Well, it's only for a subset of students. It's only for the students that fit this particular profile. We have WIN blocks in every single school, and within those WIN blocks, for the most part, it's all hands on deck with regard to the staff that can provide services to students. And so when we did the training in February, I sent out an email or a survey to principals and school leaders, the ELA leaders, asking them to list the people that would be providing interventions such as Language Circle, Project Read. And then we took that and we used that list to compile the list for participants in February.
But if this program gets approved, it sounds like we're going to require those children in 5th grade to get basically a pullout or some sort of,
It's an intervention.
a more
definitely.
intense intervention than just a whole classroom.
Right.
Absolutely.
So in my mind, I'm saying what happens in 3rd, if we know that in 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade, these are the numbers, what are we doing to do that same type of, just move it down a couple of grades?
Yeah,
Do we
so
not have the personnel?
No.
Do we not have the,
we do have the personnel. So right now, if you walk into a first grade a school and there's a first grade WIN block happening, you'll see students pulled in small group. Some of those teachers may be using these materials because that's what's required for those students. And other teachers would be doing other interventions or extensions based on what the kids need. Is that answering that question?
no, I think the question was, once they get to 3rd, like you're saying here, the reason why that they've tried these other things and they don't work, for lack of a better way to say it. So now we're gonna go with this new thing that is based on what you said, it's scientific, it's all of these pieces.
Mhm.
All I'm trying to figure out is why, if we're gonna do it in 5th grade, wouldn't we just do it in 3rd and 4th to
We
make
do.
it consistent?
Yes.
But then you mentioned another program that they're going to use instead, so I
So-
think that's the confusion.
Yes, it is. That is what's confusing. So, Language Circle has a series of programs. They start with primary phonics, which is the little guy's kindergarten, and then it moves into Project Read, which is typically grades 1 to 3, and then linguistics, which goes all the way up through adulthood. And so, right now, we're not waiting for 3rd grade. When we did our Project Read intervention training in February, we had 1st grade interventionists in that room. Like, we're not waiting until kids are failing. We're trying to catch it real quick and then move on it right away, not wait.
But the new program is called something different than Project Read.
It is, yes.
But
But
it's
it's
the
the same
same,
thing?
it's the same thing.
It's the same company.
Yes.
Just different
It's-
levels,
yeah.
for different levels.
That's, I was trying to figure out what the different, it's 2 different names,
Yeah.
Yes.
but it's basically
company.
very
Same
similar,
company.
just, so we're not waiting till
No.
middle school, basically, that's all.
No.
As
This
soon
is
as
the
we
kids that are
identify
going through this
need.
that still need that. They still need the intervention and they haven't had it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we need to, or they don't have it currently in middle school
Mm-hmm.
time or upper elementary school. It doesn't mean that we still need to do more training for special education teachers on Project Read for grades 1 through 3 currently, because we have not trained all those teachers. It's just that we already have that curriculum, like this isn't an addition, it might just be more materials, but we already have that. This is something new now bringing on board to extend the reading intervention curriculum that we have in the district. And the writing component too. Did you speak to the writing
So the
component?
writing component is called written expression. It's framing your thoughts, written expression. And what that does is it supports students in writing and understanding complex sentence structures. And so students are taught from bare bones, like a sentence needs to have a subject and a predicate, and then how to expand those sentences to include predicate expanders like how, why, where, when. And that helps kids in both the writing of complex sentences and the reading of complex sentences because they understand common language structures about how, like an author using when in the beginning of many, many sentences in literature. And so they're able to look at and dissect, and for lack of a better word, dissect that sentence in a way that allows for comprehension. So again, same company, Language Circle, different arm of that company.
Ms. Rodriguez?
I was just looking that up because I wasn't following. Okay, so I understand better now. So you're talking about we have a phonics program for the little guys that falls under Language Circle, and then grades 1 through 3 has a different one, but again falling under there.
Yes.
And so this is the expansion piece. I think that was the piece that I wasn't
Right.
fully grasping, and so then I'm hearing like we're basically buying a whole new program and just sort of like throwing out the rest, but not training everybody in the that's what it sort of sounded like.
Like an
If you
So-
took a 5th grader or a
It's
6th
an
grader,
add-on,
right,
yeah.
yeah, if you took a 5th grader or a 6th grader and you started with Project Read, the pace that goes at, they're never gonna be exposed to that in the texts in the
Right.
classrooms because it's much below where they are, right? So what they do, and many other reading programs do the same thing, is they take and tailor it to what they'll be seeing, how they'll be exposed to reading in the middle school level,
Okay.
for lack of Steph is the expert, but
Makes sense. Looking for a motion to approve?
Motion.
Vote.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to forward with an approval. Roll call?
Mr. Agia?
Yes.
Ms. Larrabee?
Yes.
Ms. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Thank you.
thank you very much.
So we'll go on to 3.03, update on credit recovery.
So you have before you credit recovery options for both Durfee High School as well as the RLM RPA. I know you just got it right before the meeting. Credit recovery was added to the agenda later on, and it was in the middle of preparation for graduation at both of those schools, so I apologize for that. But Mr. Woodward actually has put together pretty comprehensive sheet for both schools and can highlight some of the things that we're doing at each of the schools as well as who is serviced by these options. So, Drew.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm happy to share the credit recovery update for spring 2023 as the superintendent shared. As she said, there's 2 fact sheets in front of you that goes through some specifics on each program, and these are the programs or the credit recovery pathways that students have the ability or have access to in the second semester of this school year. So the first fact sheet is outlaying the Durfee credit recovery options, and the second fact sheet is the RTA ones. Before going into specifics, just generally we are looking to expand credit recovery options for students throughout the district. Not only from COVID loss, but our students are coming to us with very unique needs, and oftentimes there's either a learning gap or some interrupted education, or students are moving around. So we see this as a really strong tool to support on-time graduation, increase engagement, etc. As we've gone through this year, we've noticed some pretty strong results, especially for our seniors in credit recovery. We feel it's a really effective structure to support their on-time graduation. But we've also noticed less consistent or inconsistent results for our underclassmen in high school, grades 9 through 11, and that's something that we're looking to work on tweaking and retooling, and always trying to be innovative to get better results. So if I can just share some of the highlights for spring 2023, starting with Durfee. The first is a unit grade recovery, and this is kind of like a tweak or a pilot of programs that we've dabbled in the past, but this is really the first time it's been really structured and been given an opportunity to all 9th grade students who had been failing throughout the year. So we haven't, for the first time, we're not waiting till summer when a student has already failed, but we're trying to push that back and give students opportunities in a more structured way to recover quarter grades, whether it's quarter 2 or maybe they had a bad quarter 3. So in this intervention or this credit recovery pathway, teachers and counselors identified the students who were failing 1 or more core academic subjects. We really tried to prioritize math as if a student was failing multiple, just because the research show it's so important to on-time graduation. Our next priority was science, due to the fact that students are taking, most freshmen are taking the MCAS in science, and it's a high-stake test, so we wanted to support them with those skills as well. In the unit grade recovery, it varied by subject. It was an after-school program, so students were required to attend 2 days a week from 3 to 5. But because the platforms were online, they did have access to it, at home as well, and some students moved quicker than others through the modules. Math used Mathia, ELA used ANET benchmark rewrites and revisions. Science used Google Classroom format through OpenSciEd. Social studies used some specific units through Edgenuity. Before you, you can also see the enrollment, generally between 30 and 50 students. We had 2 teachers staffed for most of these core. We felt it was important to have content-specific teachers who could provide that academic support when students got stuck. And the results to date, right now we have 56 quarters recovered. We're in our last 2 weeks, so we'll have a better understanding of the final results once the school year ends. Oftentimes we see kind of like a mad dash at the end to complete work before the school year, so we can update at the end of the school year how many quarters are recovered. And for that program, our secondary goal is really to have as many students as possible pass with their final grade, because this is quarter recovery. So the hope is that while they're going through this credit recovery, they're also passing their quarter 4. So it's helping them in real time, in their current class, and also getting them prepared for sophomore year. At Durfee, the next 3 kind of pathways that you see, the credit recovery labs for juniors and seniors. That's your Edgenuity credit recovery courses. Both 11th and 12th grade students had access, but 12th graders were prioritized to support on-time graduation. We started this back in quarter 2, but it continued and picked up steam as it went through the school year. We also added an an after-school component in the spring due to demand for students. Some of the results in credit recovery, you see about 95 students were enrolled in the spring, the majority of them seniors. They completed 103 courses needed for graduation. Senior summer school is also somewhat of a new concept at Durfee High School. It's essentially students who teachers have identified are almost dead in the water or on track to fail for the year. After April vacation and for the last 3 to 4 weeks of the school year, they're in this intensive credit recovery lab so that they have the ability to pass for the school year. So this was flagged by 12th grade teachers as well as counselors and support staff. We had 79 students within senior summer school taking 115 courses. So these could be academic courses, or they could be electives that a student might need in order to earn that 100 credits or to fulfill different elective requirements. So on the results of that, was pretty successful. 77 of 79 students successfully completed. We have 2 students still working and will be working this summer to complete their requirements. Competency-based testing, which is also an Ingenuity exam-only course that is being phased out at Durfee, and it was really brought into Durfee, designed to support students during the COVID years to adjust the learning loss. So this year, seniors were able to take an exam if they failed a class during the 1920 COVID shutdown year or the 2021 remote hybrid year. For courses failed last school year, they had to take the full course. Students need to earn a score of 70 or higher to demonstrate competency, and all the students, 100% of students did earn credit through these exams, totaling 72 course credits. The final pathway to highlight is Evolve. Although it's not a specific credit recovery pathway, it is geared towards off-track students and helping them get on track so that they graduate on time, prepared for college and careers. So again, they have rolling admissions throughout the year based on space. The students go through the 10-week courses called Transformative Learning Experiences that allows them to demonstrate mastery in a subject and earn credit. They currently have 82 students and are projected at 100 for the beginning of next school year. So for their senior class, all of them off track by a year plus. 26 out of 31 graduated on time. 2 of them are still engaged and enrolled in summer school, and 3 students unfortunately have left us, but hopefully we can re-engage them. So those are the Durfee high-level view.
Thank you. Any questions? Ms. Rogers?
I'm just trying to think of how to phrase my question. I see there's some efforts for our 9th graders, right? And then for our mostly 12th graders, right? It sounds like that. But what happens to our kids in 10th grade? It looks like the only option we really have for them is Evolve.
It's a good question. Originally, the unit grade recovery, we had hoped to roll it out for grade 9 and 10. It's our strategy really for 9 and 10. I think to do more real-time recovery for grades. During the roll-up practice, the procedure and building it up with the deans and with the teachers we were able to staff it with, we had to make a decision to prioritize one grade over the other for this year. We prioritized freshmen just because of the research that showcases how important 9th grade is to on-time graduation. But our true goal is for 9th grade to roll it out much earlier at the end of quarter 1 and have it ready to go for 9th and 10th graders ideally, where students would be recovering in quarter 2 for quarter 1, for quarter 3 they could recover too, so it'd be a full year program instead of one that's launched in the spring of the year. I think the deans and the teachers worked really hard to identify some high impact standards-based pieces that would help the students not only recover but also be more successful in their classes. So that's, I think, what they're hoping. So I think the lessons learned is that we feel like it would be much better launched earlier in the school year. so that we could service more kids.
Well, that was actually that sort of answered my other question, was why are we waiting until the spring when we know that if we catch these kids a little bit earlier, we'll have better engagement. Like, I wouldn't want to see my kid failing and then we wait until, the fourth quarter to say, hey, now you're in danger of failing for the year and now we're going to lose this kid. So if we can intervene sooner, that makes a lot more sense. And then I just saw a gap for our 10th graders, but it sounds like that became a staffing issue.
Yeah, because we felt that it would be most impactful if we had like the teacher of that content with that after school class. We wanted to keep them relatively small, so it became a challenge to get everyone.
And we didn't have the staffing for that.
Yeah, it was a volunteer stipended opportunity.
I yield for now.
It's like,
Just a question on the CBTs. Can you give me an idea how that is how the kids take it, where they're taking it, who's administering? Could you just give me a...
Sure. At Durfee, CBTs are administered by the student support specialist, one of the student support specialists, during a period that they have elective period. So they typically take 1 hour to 2 hours, and it's administered by one of our support personnel. And those are typically pre-scheduled throughout the spring.
Okay. Is there more than one person? Is there more than one student? Is it one-to-one? Do they have their electronic devices as their phones and stuff like that?
So they're not allowed to have their phones out. We have been talking with Edgenuity. They have some increased security options where it can actually like shut down access to all the different websites through through the IP address or through. So that's something that we're looking to bring on for next year. It's typically, it could be one-on-one, but more typically it's in small groups, so you could see up to like 5 or so students, especially if they're taking the same exam in a computer lab setting. To the best of my knowledge, that's how Durfee does it.
Right. I know we're gonna cover RPA in a minute, but is that the same system over there as well?
So for competency-based, at RPA is a little bit more widespread.
I mean, I guess I can wait, but
my hope was this was more related to Durfee.
Sure.
RPA is going to be at a different time,
Okay.
so we have much
I can
more
wait,
questions
yeah.
about them.
I can wait.
Do you?
I do.
Yeah.
I yield for now.
My only concern is the grade 9 that we see here.
Sure.
And also, the reason why I asked for this to be here is because I'm curious of how this affects special education students. And that's why it's before us. In this particular meeting, I've received some calls and complaints from parents related to students that have earned no credits, are not making progress, and they haven't been allowed to do some of the credit recovery options, such as what you just talked about, the competency-based test or Edgenuity or other options. And I'm not understanding why we would phase it out totally, and 2, why they don't have access to it. When students are not getting any credits for the whole year, that's a major, major problem.
I agree.
You had mentioned some kind of data, I couldn't write it down quick enough, but if students fail 9th grade, it's not good,
No.
for lack of a better way
Yeah,
to say it. You said it more
absolutely.
articulate than that. So when we have 9th graders that aren't making any credits, like what are we doing and what programming do we have? There's another agenda item here about continuing of programming so that we know what is it in the middle school. Like if I have a certain set of issues that I'm dealing with in middle school, how is that at the high school? I think there's the disconnect in the system.
Sure.
So that was 2 of the reasons why. But when I saw the first thing, we target 9th graders for the unit grade recovery, I don't understand why we wouldn't allow a student, when we've allowed it in COVID, we're allowing it for seniors, why we wouldn't allow a 9th grader to do a credit recovery option of a competency-based test. So if I'm a student that's having difficulty, social emotional issues or whatever, and I knew English 9, I might be well above the English 9 curriculum. Like I could just go and bang it out, or math or whatever. They don't have that option. And then we wait until 11th or 12th, and then now they'll have that option. So, or they get transferred to RPA and they have that option. So that's my concern. So anybody can answer.
There's a lot of layers to that. So when we think about the transition of students to high school, it's a difficult one for most. And then when you think about kids that struggle the most, what are the issues at hand? A lot of it has to do with the environment, a lot of it has to do with their behavior, a lot of it has to do with class cutting. So when you look at some kids that are struggling and they're failing a lot of their courses, we're also trying to just get them to go to class, right? And when we think about the foundational years of freshman and sophomore and the learning that needs to take place in the classroom, to then simply cut straight to the chase of credit recovery, a competency-based test, that's not, to me, that's not the answer. Okay, because seat time in a classroom with a teacher, with the, I don't know if you're talking special education, with the services, that doesn't happen by way of Edgenuity. And what we've seen as we've started to pilot Edgenuity, going back several years in summer school and then bringing it in COVID times, the students that struggle the most with Edgenuity are our special education students, because the services aren't delivered in real time. There's not someone in the room to do what an IEP says, you know. So the decision was made that we're gonna focus our Edgenuity efforts on the upperclassmen. We're gonna pilot some things with freshmen this year to build in structurally. You know, prior to COVID, we were already working on this unit recovery piece, because I think that's the answer. I think that when a student struggles after a term, if we can have certified teachers and support staff with students after school to recover grades, now they're back on the beam with the skills that they need, not only to succeed the next term, but for the whole course and then the courses that follow. When you're talking about a senior that's exiting and we've got a freshman course hanging over their head, but they've done well in their courses, let's say it's ELA, they failed the ELA freshman year, but now they're a junior and a senior and they're passing and they're fine. Well, why make them go back and take that whole course? Let's give them the competency-based test. That lines up with what the state did with MCAS for the last 3 years, right? But that's going away with this particular graduating class with the competency determination. We can't say that, okay, Matt, you failed ELA MCAS, but you passed your ELA your senior year, so we can hand you a diploma. That's the terminal. It was terminal this year, right? Unless the state changes their mind, they're not going to allow that to go forward. And then thinking about the high school experience and the opportunity to be in school and to be with trained staff for 4 years. The class of 2023 didn't have it their freshman year or their sophomore year. So the thinking behind ending competency-based, unless directed otherwise, right, was that this was appropriate for this time, but moving forward, the best answer is a student in a classroom with a teacher, always. Of course, there are unique cases where kids struggling in the environment and they need to be in online schooling, etc. But when we're looking at what we can offer, like think about what we had 5 years ago, 6 years ago. We had summer school. That was the option. So all the advice that we're getting, we're building more and more, and there's more and more options. But it's not about depriving people, certain kids, from access to. It's about thinking about the student's trajectory and what's coming next, you know, and to put a freshman in a credit recovery lab to do a competency-based test because he blew off 90 days of class or his behavior was such that he was out of the classroom a lot. Well, we just maybe reinforced with that student that, oh, well, I'm going to do this next year too, and then I can just take a test at the end. So,
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. And
yeah.
I do think that you've tried a bunch of different things, so I'm not saying that you haven't tried those things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to look at it from the perspective of not all kids are created equal as far as what their issues are, what their disability is, and the like. And if we've tried things and we're not successful with the services that you mentioned, if they're either not implemented, haven't been with fidelity, something just went awry all year. So a freshman doesn't have any credits. That's not a good setup, and I don't think anybody would agree that that's a good setup moving into next year with no credits at all.
Mm-hmm.
So if that happens, what happens in summer school? Are they not eligible for summer school either?
They're eligible for summer school.
So what's the eligibility criteria?
So typically, we look at having a minimum grade of 55. However, when we're working with our freshmen, we know that struggle that happens in that year. And if a freshman wants to go to summer school and needs to go to summer school, they're going to go to summer school.
And what does summer school look like? Was it credit recovery? Was it Edgenuity only because of COVID? Or is that a component in summer school is summer school a hybrid, is it a?
Summer school depends on the setting, it depends on the numbers, you know, going back 2 years, we leaned heavily on Edgenuity because nobody wanted to work summer school. Last year, staff started to come back around. This year, we're fabulously staffed with content certified people. So we're saying, all right, just similar to what I just said, let's take the staff that's willing to work and be here and put them in front of our younger kids and give them what they need. And if there are, you know, specialized areas that we don't have someone to put, like calculus, not that people go to school for summer school for calculus, but that's where the lab would come into play.
Yeah, and if they, in special education and you don't make progress for the year, how does that happen? So if we have a freshman that just did not make progress all year, and we're at the end of the year with 0 credits, what are the systems in place to stop that from happening? That might be a question for special ed folks too, but I'm not
Sure.
only saying you, but.
There's a lot that happens along the way in terms of team meetings, reconvening, looking at the IEP, looking at appropriate services in the IEP. Is the student engaging in those services?
I think, and then through summer school, through all the other options, meeting with teachers after school to get all the information that we can, giving opportunities for after school help, before school help, any outlet that we can get a kid to re-engage, I think we're gonna try in that building.
So in 9th grade where we said the grade recovery, did that just not happen this year? In grade 9?
Grade recovery did happen in grade 9.
From when? When did it stop?
It started at the beginning of quarter 4. So in the April 1st or the first week of April, and it was for any students who failed one or more quarters, though the priority was for students who failed 2 or more quarters, because they were the most at risk to fail at the end of the school year. So it's after school, it's still ongoing right now. It's going to wrap up in a week or at the end of school. But there's grade recovery in math, science, ELA, and history, and the deans and the department heads worked with the 9th grade teachers to determine what were the most high leverage pieces through the online platforms that they wanted students to go through.
I'd like to just ask at some point to get how they were notified and recommended for the program, but 4th quarter obviously is not the greatest time. But as Mr. Damaris was saying, sometimes we get kids that, based on their disabilities, they just don't go to class, they just can't come to school, whatever. To tell them now, you're gonna come to school all day and then go to 3 to 5, a lot of times I could probably predict what that answer is gonna be. Which is why I was advocating, and I still advocate for, a system of some sort of, even in the school when you have a hook, a counselor, support, if you said to support people or whoever, we have staff, we've staffed up, that I don't understand why we wouldn't offer them so that they'd still have to have the seat time for that program to be able to, and you can document it that they're in. It's just a different look at it for certain kids, not as a whole, because I think your point's well taken, that kids would just say, the heck with it, I'm not going to class, I'll do this. But when we have no credits, I think, some special cases could be made, especially when they have disabilities and they just can't go to class. Like we used to have homebound back in the day.
Sure.
I don't know if we still have that.
I mean, the students with
Yep.
medical issues or legal issues, absolutely.
So when that happens, what does their day look like? Is it the same as it used to be? A tutor teaches all the subjects and they get to work and back and forth?
Pretty much, yeah.
So I don't want to be in a position as a school committee member, when a parent calls me to say, we have a concern, my son has this disability, I don't want to be in a position to tell them, you know what I would do? I would go to a doctor and get a note saying he can't be in school, and then he's going to get a homebound tutor and he's going to be able to pass classes with a lot less scrutiny than what you have to do during the thing. Everything the way it's set up here, the next time the person calls, unless something changes, I'm recommending that to them. Because a lot of kids that have social emotional issues and a bunch of other issues can get a note and have to be on homebound, rather than be in school if they're going to have a more doable type of situation. And I would rather have them in the school with the counselor, with the support staff, in front of me to say, yeah, do the Edgenuity, do a competency base, do something to at least give you some credits going into the next year. That's just me personally, but anybody else have any concerns or thoughts on that, Ms. Rodriguez?
Well, I have a lot of concern about a 9th grader on an IEP that ends the year with credits, right? You're talking about a 14, 15-year-old kid who doesn't have a whole lot of control. So we can talk about behavior and we can talk about what's keeping that kid out. But then I would say that maybe we're looking at an IEP that doesn't have the services that kid actually needs. Are we in the right setting? Are we in a right placement? So the end of the year, I would have a lot of concern about a kid with 0 credits. I don't know anything about this particular kid, but that screams to me like we have a problem here in that system. There was a breakdown somewhere.
I agree with you. I mean, a lot of times we talk about, I think we need to talk about environment, services available, placement. And we're in a brand new school and everybody wants to be there, but it might be with 2,400 kids, it might not be the best environment for every student.
Right, so then what do we do for those kids?
Sure,
Because
sure.
it can't just be, oh, well, that kid didn't make it here, or that kid didn't show up in class, and that kid isn't in a seat.
I mean, I can say confidently that there's nobody on my staff that says, oh, well, right? I think we're looking for the next thing.
Right, and I'm sort of being facetious,
Sure,
but at
sure.
the end of the year, that's not the time to have the conversation. The same way that I just asked, Drew, what are we doing for those kids after they fail the first quarter
But
to get them
I'll just say,
engaged?
if you look at each case and you go through the documentation, we're not waiting till the end of the year to say, what do we do now? It's a constant conversation, families, student, teachers, and it's ongoing. Sometimes, whatever it is you're trying doesn't work, that doesn't mean nothing happened, right?
Right, and that's what I'm saying. How are we having those conversations with families? I'm not saying this, anybody at this table, let a kid just go all year long, let them fail, and now they're calling, members of the school committee to complain about. I'm not for 1 second suggesting that. But what systems do we have in place to kind of capture those kids before we get to the fourth quarter? Because by that point, it's too late. Right, we've already lost them. It sort of goes hand in hand with that discussion earlier. If we're waiting until the fourth quarter, we've waited too long.
Well, this was a pilot to launch and say, I want this from day one next year, right? And so that by the end of term 1, it's offered to students. If they failed, they can recover their grade. So it wasn't like, let's just wait till the fourth quarter to get this going. But there was also a lot of legwork that needed to be done to set up the curriculum of what is the powerful standards that we're going to pull from these courses to focus on that would be tethered straight to the next course so that it would set them up for success. I'd absolutely rather have seen it launched in the fall after the term 1.
That wasn't a criticism.
Yeah.
It's a moving forward. What do we do with that?
Absolutely.
I think sometimes we hear this stuff as criticisms, but they're not. Right? I'm suggesting that if we're talking about that, and it sounds like everybody here is on that same page, how do we capture these kids sooner so that we're not getting the phone call at the end of the year, especially if you've got a kid on an IEP, that kid shouldn't be ending the year, a 9th grader ending the year without any credits.
Ms. Lavery? My last comment is on the phasing out of the competency base. I think that should be revisited, whether it's used sparingly or whatever. As we're talking here, I know we talked about the seniors that had the option for that. I don't see why any student, if they could pass with a 70 score, with fidelity, with proper security, they're not cheating or whatever, why we wouldn't allow them at some point to, even if it's only a couple of classes, to help. It could be a 9th grader, a 10th grader, it could be anything, to say, what if the kid could pass Algebra 1, whatever the freshman equivalent of that is, on the test if they already know the material. Right now they get 0 credits, but if we said there's some sort of program where it's allowed for the kid that's graduating to graduate, but it's not allowed for my son that was in 9th grade that could do the same. So even in the current year, I understand phasing it out. I understand all of the rationale, but I think it should be looked at again to see if there is such a way to throw a bone, like I say, throw a bone.
I hear what you're saying.
It's just to get a hook into them to say, like,
tricky. I just want to be careful with that. If a senior just competency-based tested out of an Algebra 1 course because he demonstrated that he passed subsequent to that, I mean, before he even took the test for that, he passed geometry, he passed Algebra 2, he passed statistics, right? But he had this thing hanging over from his freshman year, hanging over his head, right? So I think that's an appropriate way to do it. I don't know that we're setting a kid up for success if we competency test him Algebra 1 at the end of his freshman year after he failed. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, right? But is he set up for geometry in subsequent higher level math?
Yeah, we can use any course. Like I use Algebra 1 because it's in my head. could be English 9, it could be a social study, whatever it is. We have children that can't come to school for a variety of reasons, but they have the capacity and the intellect and the experiences, whatever, to be able to pass that material. That's what true competency-based testing is. So whether it's not in a math class, it's just a way to get the kids some credits. You walk in as a 16-year-old, now you're a repeat freshman at 16 and a half. So if 4 years go by, 16 and a half, 17 and a half, 18 and a half, 19 and a half, we're telling that kid everything's gonna go perfect for you for 4 years and you're gonna be 20 by the time you graduate. You ready? I don't think I think that's setting some kids up. Whereas if we gave them a little bit of, even if it's a elective class, just to build up some credits, give them an opportunity. That's how the alternative school worked back in the day. I think that's some of how you guys explained what you did this year to get some of your seniors. A little of this, a little of that, a little of this, a little of that, you know, to make them get across the, I'm only asking to take a look at it for ninth graders, that's all. With that being said, I think a good segue is into the next one, the continuum of special ed programming. I asked for this to be on the agenda because I think the case that I'm referring to, that I received the calls on, it really points to what do we have in the middle school for programs. What do we have in the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school? They should be similar. And I think for too long we've either gotten rid of some, we've done this, but there's not a nice, solid continuum, staffed up appropriately programs across the district. And that's my opinion. If anybody has otherwise, please let me know.
So, one of the things that I did early on when I came to Fall River is I was in the classrooms, looking in the buildings, talking about what types of programs you have here, what do they look like, how do they compare to either a different middle school in the district, or how does it compare, vertically going up from different grades. And early on, it was very clear that there was a lack of consistency. So everybody was doing something, and some things were similar, but a lot of things were different based on building-wise. And then when kids, after 8th grade, went to Durfee, things were really different. Durfee kind of changed their model. So I identified early on that we need to really take a look at this, because I'm not sure if the Durfee kind of different model to look at things, especially with students that are social emotional or with social emotional disabilities, if that is successful in meeting their needs and they're earning our high school diplomas, they're off to colleges, then what can we bring down to the middle school level to support the students there, so that when we go to Durfee, they're set up for success, right? And then it trickles down like that. Right now, this is why we have a programming task force that is kind of going through all of these different types of programs, looking at, who are the students in there? How are they getting referred in there? What's the entry? What's the exit criteria? What do they need when they go to the next grade? Like, are they especially transitional years, right? So when I leave Spencer Borden and I go to Morton, does that look the same? Or if it's a little bit different, how is Spencer Borden preparing the students to go to Morton? And same thing with any middle school going to Durfee, right? Because I agree with you, Mr. Aguirre, that it isn't consistent, and I'm not sure if the current model supports all of the special education students that go from middle schools to high school at Durfee, because we're also looking at how many go to RPA, how many have to take some time at Stone before they can be successful at Durfee. And if that's the case, and again, I just don't have enough time in the district to be able to really speak to that, and I'm happy to have these guys share because they've been here longer than me, but if that's the case, then what needs to be put in place at Durfee so there is more success of those students transitioning in. Again, like I said, same thing, if the Durfee model is successful, then we should be bringing that back down to 7th and 8th grade. Because if it's giving them more access to inclusion is really what our whole goal is, we should be bringing that back down there. Because right now it seems like a little bit of a disconnect in my
So what is it currently for social emotional students in the middle school?
In the middle schools,
Separate classrooms.
for the most part, they are substantially separate classrooms with limited opportunities for inclusion. And again, it depends on the building. So I know like at some of our middle schools, they try to, if a student is successful in a certain academic area, maybe my strength is math or my strength is reading, then they might be able to push into, general education classrooms for those classes, right? And then they come back to social emotional. In other middle schools, it's strictly like the unified arts classes that they get to go into. It's just really different, and it's not about like, what I'm learning is that it's not always about the needs of the students. We're also needing to look at our overall enrollment and classes that are already at max enrollment. So if we have that classes can't go over 30, and I'm just making up the number because I can't remember exactly what it is, 28, but then teachers get stipends if they have a couple extra kids or something like that. Is that how it works?
They would have to have a paraprofessional.
Okay. Classes are already at that in some buildings, so it doesn't provide as much opportunity.
Yeah, but
It's
that's
something
for
that-
inclusion.
No, it doesn't provide as much opportunity for, say, a substantially separate classroom, a child in a substantially separate classroom in one building to go
push
into
out.
inclusion opportunities, which at Durfee, they have much more experience in inclusion. So I would want them to be practicing going into inclusion and getting that success, and they should if that's where they can learn the best, right? They should be going out. But sometimes it's for a variety of reasons, primarily being, classrooms that are full.
Right, but to peel back a little more.
Sure.
So a child with a
Social
severe
emotional-
social emotional issue in the middle school is in a substantially separate classroom
Yes.
based
Most
on
of the
most
time.
of the time.
Yes.
And that in an IEP is called a substantially separate classroom.
Yes.
So
I don't
I'm
want
in-
to say
so
that
I'm
there's
in eighth
no
grade.
one.
So I'm in 8th grade, and I've been in a substantially separate classroom with my IEP Xed off saying substantially separate from 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade.
Yeah.
So now I go to 9th grade. What substantially separate social emotional classes do we have at the 9th grade?
I'm going to ask
So
back at
currently,
Heather.
we don't have an identified substantially separate program due to the reports that came out. We disbanded our bridge program.
Right.
So
In the old
That's-
days,
I
they
think
used
that's a
to,
couple of different,
right,
that statement was a lot, because the bridge program problem wasn't just because we got a report.
right. But Bridge used to be this substantially sub-separate for social emotional. That was disbanded, and kids are pushed out into,
So their IEP gets changed? So their needs change, and we just change their IEP?
No, if a kid needs a sub-separate placement, we do have sub-separate classes. We just don't currently have a sub-separate social emotional
program, yeah.
So 8th grade, I don't know the numbers, I'm just making them up. We have, all of our kids come in, have 700 kids that go to the school, right, freshmen or whatever, 600. We have 20 kids that have a social emotional IEP for substantially separate classroom. So they go to 9th grade.
how do
They
those
don't go into
transition
it,
needs?
where do they go, and who changes their IEP?
So
to-
the past few years, we have not had that many students that have come to us. Next year we do, and we have a class set up for that.
So describe what that looks like. So a student would come in, start their day in,
Based on whatever the grid says, whatever the determination is, there's a behavior support class. We're kind of building this back because we see the need. They may spend one period in there with them, probably more para support as they move to English and math and science, but they're not going to be in one room all day to help that transition into the real world. It would be hard for a kid in 18 years old if they just spent the whole day in one room.
I understand, so what would they be called? What would their IEP be called?
their IEP stays the same because it's still substantially separate classrooms, but it's the program. Again, we're re-looking at the names of all of our programs to based on skills and, all of this. So it's what I think that you call it it's just a room, right? It's their room that they go in and out of, but they're not in a specialized program per se, if I understand how Durfee works it, because it could be kids with different disabilities in there, not just social emotional kids.
I understand.
Right.
I don't want to belabor the point. I think the point is that we are trying to fix it.
Right.
I get it.
Yeah.
But for years I've been saying this similar type of thing at these meetings, and it's getting real tiring to have the same conversation with parents that says this is what's happening. So it's getting real tiring, so that's, my frustration level is based on that, not because of any personalities.
Yeah.
But what I would like to request, without the names, is any student in the last 2 years that had a substantially separate IEP for a social and emotional class, and a copy of that IEP versus the 9th grade IEP, without the names.
Sure, and it doesn't say social emotional program. So any IEP, let's just take a middle school program. It'll say substantially separate classroom, Talbot Middle School, Morton Middle School. So what would identify the needs of the student, the skills, would be that grid, right? So you'll see that, but it doesn't mean that. Again, the way that Durfee does it, I'm still learning too, so I understand the question, the thoughts, whatever. It's still a classroom where it's outside of the general education setting because there aren't any typical students in there.
I get it. My only request is to get the information.
Yeah.
However you get it.
Yeah.
The principals of each school in the middle school know exactly who was in their social and emotional classes for
Yeah.
the last 2 years. We should know as supervisors, directors, team chairs,
Yeah.
yourself, whoever, everybody should know exactly what the identified number of kids is. And all I'm
Right.
asking for is to say what
We
their
can talk
IEP
about,
was,
yeah.
not the kid's name, because that's not what I'm
Right,
looking for,
right.
and what we changed it to in the high school. That's
And it may
basically-
say the same thing, it's just what I want you to understand, right? It may say the same thing, I may not, but those should have been transition meetings that we
highlight.
also had.
Whatever it says, but
Yeah.
I just want to check it to be sure that as we're going, with putting stuff in IEPs that we actually are implementing.
Yeah,
Not just
I
putting them
I
in
agree.
because we say, this is
Absolutely.
what it sounds good, and we get a parent to sign off. I want just a check and a balance on it. I hope that it comes out that everything's great, personally.
Well, we
But-
still are looking at our program.
Yes,
So even if
exactly.
the IEPs are written properly, and again, we're, having the meetings with families when we move students in and out of those types of programs, yes, but the overall programs themselves, we need
No,
to
I
look
understand.
at, which is what we're doing.
Ms. Roderick, do you have a question?
So what did we do with those kids in the last few years? You're saying like for the last 4 or 5 years, we haven't had an SEL program at Durfee. So the kids coming from the middle school, they were in an SEL classroom, sub-separate SEL classroom over at Talbot. We are transitioning over to Durfee. They still need a sub-separate classroom. They can't really transition into, the gen ed setting. Where did those kids go?
They still had a sub-separate classroom with a special ed teacher, para support, identified based on the grid, whatever the time they need in there. So maybe they needed, their grid said 100 minutes of reading, and they were identified, maybe they needed more support in reading, or maybe they, whatever the grid said, we did provide those services based on the grid. So that's what we
If
were
it's-
reading.
Not as a program.
It's not isolated into a
Right.
classroom all day.
And I guess if a student comes to you, Becca, with reading, writing, and math services all in a C grid, what would that look? What would the
and
day
that
look?
is a lot of our kids.
Yeah,
so
so
where
they
did
depend-
those kids go?
They would get that much time, so maybe the reading services happen in English and it happened in history and science, and the writing happened, and depending on how many minutes were in the grid, and if it said sub-separate, that's what they got with a special ed teacher in those classes.
In one room.
That traveled. They do go to different rooms. We want our sub-separate science kids to go to a science lab. I want them to be in a science lab like the gen ed population. So from English to science, they move to a different room.
So are they traveling as a cohort?
Not always, because not all kids need the same thing.
Everybody's at a different level.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to wrap my brain around.
It's different because we're so big. We don't have to cohort kids because they
Okay.
have the opportunity to, if they're good in math, they get to go out for math.
And
If
it's
that's
not
what the
on their
grid-
IEP.
Yes, if it says B grid services, they go out for math, but we have that capability because we have all the levels.
To talk about middle school similarly, we're actually departmentalized. So they may travel as an individual cohort, but there are four, I'll give you, Custom Middle School, for example, there are 4 substantially separate language-based teachers.
Mhm.
Each of them teaches a content area, so that way we can maximize the impact of kids' instruction. So one teacher teaches English, one special ed teaches math, one science, one
Yeah.
social studies, and the groups of up to 12 kids will travel together with paraprofessional support to the different classes. They're all taught by special ed teachers. It's all still grid C service delivery because it's out of the general ed setting. But we're trying to build in those transitions to kind of treat it very similarly to how the other kiddos are
transitioning,
accessing, are
right.
treated and are accessing classes in, Custer Middle School. We want them to be, at least if they can't be included for the instruction, let's look for that inclusion opportunity in the general milieu of the school and how they actually interact with, the building.
I'm looking off because I'm thinking, so if it's just sort of like one home base, and that's how I'm kind of hearing it, right? We've got one sub-separate kind of home-based classroom for these kids that are coming in. Is it all kids that have identified needs in SEL, or is it a mix of kids
So are you talking about currently or next year?
currently?
Currently, it is based on, the groupings could have some mix, so they have more severe SEL needs in one, like they could be mixed, but it's all based on, so if their grid says 100 minutes of social emotional, they may be placed with a student that has more reading at the same time. That could happen. Next year, I've noticed when looking at the grids, there are some students that have more social emotional, which is why over the amount of minutes that are there, which is why that extra class was created. Because their minutes are more than what is currently offered in the 4 English, math, science, and history time.
Okay, I yield for now because I'm trying to wrap my brain around what that
Sorry.
physically looks like.
All right, so this year,
Yeah.
we'll go with this year. This year, then, they all don't start out at the same level, correct? So we have a math student who so we'd have a 14-year-old sub-separate with a 16-year-old sub-separate at the same level? Is that accurate?
No,
I don't know why,
no,
I mean.
No.
No,
So
you're
it's not
by
multi-grade.
grade level.
it's not multi-grade, it's grade
Yeah,
level.
no, it's by grade
All right.
level.
So that-
Different disabilities might be together is what
Okay.
she was referring to.
Not grade level?
Yes.
All right, I yield now. That's why I was off with that.
So at the middle school level, when we look at an IEP in the grid, because we keep saying about the grid. So if you have a model of a social emotional substantially separate class, is every minute in that student's day on the grid?
So not necessarily, it depends. Every minute in which they require specially designed instruction is. So I have some kiddos in, for example, I use social emotional where super hands-on learners, they do really, really well with, like, let's say tech ed. They're great in their electives, they do okay. And maybe a bad example because but let's just say they don't need specialized support in that area and they're fine. We wouldn't write that into the IEP because it's not a time when they require specialized instruction. So in some cases, we have kiddos that, you've probably heard of a few, they'll have that need all day, right? So you'll see 330 instructional minutes in their grid accounted for. Some, we may have, they struggle, seriously with English, science, social studies, let's say. Talk about a 56-minute period, you're looking at that 56 essentially times 3. So it's about 162 minutes, something like that, 160 minutes-ish in the grid every day. So you might see 160 minutes. They can use these 3 classes in the social emotional setting. Whereas that 4th class, they do really, really well with, that's the area of strength, and they can be in gen ed.
And
So
then
it's
what
based on
happens?
need.
So I guess the point is, when they might be doing okay for a little bit of time, and when you're in a social emotional IEP, that good time might not last all year.
Yep.
Might not last all period.
You're right.
So when they have to come back,
When they have to come back, it's...
do they go where?
Yeah, so it's tricky. So there'd be a reconvene of the team, obviously, to trigger any...
No, separate from that, I mean in the
okay.
classroom.
On a daily
Like in a
basis.
daily basis.
Oh, okay.
So
So,
the
if
grid
there's
might
like
not-
an
Back to
acute
their
struggle,
home.
so like I see what you're saying. So if there's like a struggle where they need to go back, they could go back to a substantially separate classroom. Or if, let's say that teacher has a prep and it's an elective or something like that, we do have school adjustment counselors that work closely, or social workers with these programs that are accessible. We do have paraprofessional support where they could go back to a classroom space or a separate space and
If I
de-escalate
could-
or work with them.
If
on
I could
that.
just jump in for 1 minute. So one of the things we need to look at when we're looking at our programming, right? Durfee is scheduling students based on grid, okay, assigning them to different classrooms. Middle schools and elementary schools assign them to a program. So if I'm a middle school principal, I'm not necessarily looking at your grid to say how many hours a day you need to spend here. I'm saying you need a substantially separate placement. This is our social emotional program. You go there, and then when you demonstrate that you're successful, you want to try a larger class setting, you have a strength in a certain academic area, then we make that shift to go into a different setting. So you see the difference on how Durfee's doing it versus middle school. And that's a disconnect, right? Because it makes the student's day look very different. And again, we need to look at, is it successful? And if it's successful, we need to start looking at how do we bring some consistency down to middle school, or if that's not successful, how do we build in more time for specialized programming at a high school level?
Yeah,
That's what we
wrote
need
here
to
that
figure.
in middle school, the grid, but I put an arrow, plus in middle school. So in my mind, in the middle school, you have home base, you have
Yes.
program stuff. I'm safe with Sarah.
Right.
She's my home base. I can always get back to her no matter what I'm feeling, anxiety, whatever it is. Home base, I can go back. But then I can go to your class when I'm doing well, and I can go. I get the
Right.
two. That's I think the missing link at the high school, in my opinion, because in the old days we used to have that, and I remember being very successful with those type of programs. Did exactly what you just said. When the student could go out, they went out. This and that. We can say, oh, this program or the whatever reports. The fact of the matter is kids that have those type of needs need that type of program, in my personal opinion.
That's
And
why we
I don't
need to do
see
that.
it happening.
Right, and
So-
we need to look at the data that says what happens when our middle school students go to high school from a substantially separate classroom. And even if it's a different type of substantially separate classroom, they go up there, what is the success rate with them being able to maintain themselves at Durfee in the current way things are scheduled, and earn their credits and get their high school diploma, like get on track. That's like the data that we need to see, and I don't have that yet.
I don't want to belabor the point. I think we made the point. The only thing that bothers me is that we shouldn't need to recreate that data now. We should have had this data over the years. If the data isn't here right now, for us to say we know what this model of students was in each of those units and how they've been successful or not, and we don't have that information, good, bad, or indifferent, that tells me that we haven't been even looking at it. Or maybe I'm wrong, but maybe it was out there. But otherwise, you'd have it in your hands. She'd have it in her hands. So it doesn't appear that we've managed it. And my worry is that I think that we've done some things in this district with changing IEPs based on what we have at the school, not based on the kids' needs. I've been saying that for years about the Stone School, how that got filled up as a day placement. I've said it in the RPA, minutes of meetings. You can go back and look at them. We just got to look at it, and I think you're on the right track. Mrs. Ponce, I think, is on the right track, wanting to look at it all and come up with a continuity plan, continuum of services. So I think you're on it, but I just hope you understand some of the frustration when we get those calls. It's like, are you kidding me again? So
I just need to clarify, elementary and middle school students who are assigned to sub-separate classrooms, they are assigned to sub-separate programs. A principal doesn't decide who's assigned and who isn't assigned. It's based on the team meeting and based on IEP. So they can schedule kids and how they're gonna schedule kids, but kids that are assigned to a social emotional or language based or whatever, that is based on their IEP, based on a team meeting, and it's district assignments. No one no principal can arbitrarily say, hey, they're gonna go into the SEL classroom. They can't do it, because legally we can't do it.
correct. No, I
That's why it's
I
legal.
100% get it.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is you forgot to say the high school.
Yep.
So that same thing that you just said exists in the high school level. It exists at Stone School. It exists at RPA.
Mhm.
So
Well,
that
the
same,
IEP drives
that
placement.
same thing. So that's why I asked for the information, because we should have that data. What are they looking at, and what is different? I have cases that people have already explained to me that I continually try to help, and that's not happening. So we're not doing it. We just proved it today that we're not doing it. We just proved today that we have social emotional classrooms at the middle school level that a student gets, whether it's on the grid or not, they get X services or X program, and that when they go to the next grade, it's not there. So that means either we should change the IEPs in 8th grade to make sure it identifies the program or more specifics to what those services are going to be for the entire day, or is it like a loophole that when you get to 9th grade, we can only follow the grid, so we're covered. That's my concern. Any other questions?
Well, I think the reality is that we have to follow the grid, but we're not naming it in the elementary or the middle school IEPs that we're putting the kids into a sub-separate program. Maybe that's the thing that has to change. Sub-separate program as a whole. So sub-separate language-based program. This, Johnny is going into a sub-separate language-based program and will receive X amount of minutes per content area in the grid.
We do identify that. We don't necessarily identify that on the placement page, but we might identify it
But
in the N1 or the key evaluation results section of the IEP. We do typically identify the program the student is in within the IEP.
But when
It's just not necessarily stated on the placement page.
right, and so when you have a family who's calling and saying my kid's IEP changed, what they're hearing, I don't know that information is clearly communicated to a family. So a kid's in a sub-separate language-based classroom. They've been in a sub-separate language-based classroom since first grade. That's where they've thrived, and now we're going to go over to the high school, and there is no sub-separate language-based program. He's still going to get the same type of services, but there's no sub-separate language-based program. So I think that's part of where that disconnect comes from, because families don't always understand that, right? I wouldn't understand that. I think there's a lot of conversation at this table going like, how does that even happen? And I also, that does make their day look very different, because if they're not able to go out, even though it says X amount of minutes, they may be getting more minutes in that sub-separate program because there isn't room for them to go out, which is a whole other issue that I'm not touching right now. But yeah, that's a whole
We're
other
already
conversation.
touching it, you don't have to.
Yeah.
We're already on it.
Taking all that information in, and I'm just sitting with it for a moment. But I think that's where that disconnect comes. Like, oh, but Johnny was in this classroom all day from 8 to 3:30, and now off they
Because it's still a
go.
substantially separate program, but now the children are traveling. So, but typically that seems to segue from elementary school to middle school. The kids are traveling in cohorts from subject to subject.
But not at every school.
But
It
not
does.
at every school, absolutely.
And
You're
looks
100%
different.
right.
I think the reason why not at every school is because of the actual size of the program. For instance, at Doran, I'll give you that example. I have one middle school social emotional classroom. One. That's it. So it's hard for me to say rotate between all of these teachers when I have one for that grade level, right? And it's the size of the building, and you know what I mean. It's the location of the program. Something we are shifting for next year.
Because that's a whole other conversation as well.
Exactly. So we do try to think about those things and shift some things around. But it also depends on sheer numbers of programs in each school. Space and capacity in each building plays a factor. You know what I mean? It depends on, there's a myriad of other things. But what we're trying to do and what we're trying to get away from, we used to have historically a social emotional class in each middle school, a language-based class in each middle school. We had each one. And
Multi-grade too.
Right, it was multi-grade and it was kind of its own island. In departmentalizing and making this bigger, what we're trying to do is get kids together for content areas, traveling, and building some more of those experiences. So it's a very complex process. And Sarah, you hit the nail on the head, I think, when you said, that's another conversation we can't have right now.
There's a lot of conversations,
there's a lot of
right?
things that tie together.
But
I
this
think
one
we need to do a
yeah.
better
looks
job
different.
of communicating that to families, how it
I agree.
changes, how we do. We need to make sure they understand when their child is going into middle school, when their child is going into high school, how it's going to change, so that they feel more assured, they have a better understanding. I agree, we absolutely need to do a better job at communicating that with families.
I would argue that we have to do a better job of understanding that too, because even within these conversations, everybody knows exactly what they're talking about, but the information is coming out very differently, and so it's not getting communicated clearly. So if we can't communicate that clearly even amongst ourselves, then how do we expect that to get communicated to families, right? We can't. And then it does look like we're changing the kid's IEP to fit our needs, which we can't do because that is wholly illegal.
It's illegal.
But that's exactly what that looks and sounds like, right? And this is how we end up with complaints, and then we start peeling back layers, and there's all kinds of issues. So I think we're right in saying it looks like we're changing the IEP, even though technically we're not. But again, because people don't have that understanding of really what that is supposed to look like or what something really means. The understanding is, we're changing the IEP to fit what we need.
I think it goes back to the continuum of services, right?
Yes.
We need to make sure that we truly have what we say we have, right? A continuum of services from K through, yeah.
And people, everybody from our staff to the kids know exactly what it is
Absolutely.
that's happening, why it's happening, and what that is going to look like at each level of education. Our pre-K kids are going to look different than our high schoolers.
Right.
And they need to.
I was gonna say, I hope so.
I don't
Any
know.
other questions?
Have you met 3-year-olds?
Okay, thank you for the info.
So I just want to just clarify though, I'm giving, you guys want like to see 2 years of IEPs from social emotional kids that have gone to Durfee. The IEP itself redacted the names obviously, and then the placement that goes
Eighth
with
graders, that transition.
those. The eighth graders, right, the
Yeah.
eighth graders, right? That's what you, that's it, that's all that you asked for.
And I think that'll be just telling to us to either dispel what some people say or not. So thank you for the info. 305 is the resiliency school, that's just, I think this one's for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that this is the alternative, special ed alternatives ed committee. Certainly, we wanted to just make sure we're not ignoring RPA. I think that it's going to warrant that this group reconvene and have a meeting just to discuss the work that's being done down there. I just wanted to say that Dr. B we've been meeting with the team. She's been down there working with the leadership team. We actually have had individual meetings and have some coming up, looking at their data, looking at what's in place. Ceci came in and did an assessment on May 11th. We're just getting that report. Ms. Obinchain was on jury duty, so we haven't unpacked that report. We're going to unpack it with the leadership team over at RPA, look at the strengths as well as the areas to the opportunities for growth and recommendations. And we will be meeting with this team and going over what that exactly says, what our plan is, and how do we address it, and how do we strengthen the supports in moving forward with RPA. We've had, I don't know if you need to add anything, but certainly we've had some good conversations, and certainly we know that there's work to be done, and I think that we're moving.
I think that I have faith in you to do the right things with that, and I didn't want it to be that we're not talking about it.
Right,
because it's
exactly.
so
Exactly.
we're aware of it, but we need to give you and your team some time to get some things in order, and then we'll have a meeting. We'll probably be meeting over the summer on
Yes.
inclusion specifically for that topic in special ed, and the RPA at the same time, so.
Yep.
And then early childhood is also part of this now, which we talked about having
Yes.
some meetings to prepare for meetings as well, so that
Exactly.
hasn't been forgotten, and it's,
Yep,
that's gonna
absolutely.
be a big increase next year, so.
Mhm.
Any new business?
So I'm holding my RPA questions because I had a list of them.
Yes,
So I have a whole thing.
you
Okay.
can.
And we also will discuss the RPA credit recovery, et cetera, at the next
RPA.
meeting,
Okay.
yes.
No new business, I entertain motion to adjourn. So made and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
You
Opposed?
just confused
So
me.
voted. Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
What just happened?